Hey everyone. So we'll be starting our data structures and algorithms coding interview series in Python with Leetcode number 1, TwoSum. TwoSum is a really great question to start off with because it helps you develop the logic and approach that you'll take to more complicated coding interview questions as we move down the line in the series. So we'll start the approach to this solution by saying, how do I tackle this problem as a person? So when we look at a problem like TwoSum, we want to say, forget for a second about the code, forget about Python, forget about computers, forget about programming, forget about all those things. How do I, as a human being, look at the code that I'm given, look at this problem, and how do I solve it? And if I can break it down into smaller problems, and that will help me to understand it and help me to tackle it. And then once I figured out how I, as a person, understand the problem and then solve it, then it becomes really easy to implement the solution in code. It's just a matter of knowing, the proper syntax. So with that in mind, let's start approaching this Leetcode number one, TwoSum problem. So we're given an array of integers, nums, and we're given an integer target. And we want to return the indices of the two numbers such that they add up to target. So what does that mean? So you can see here in example number 1, we're given an input array of nums, and then we have an integer target. And so what we're looking for is two numbers in the nums array that we're given that add up equal to our target. We want to take those two numbers and then just output their indexes. So using example number 1, let's break that down into exactly what that looks like. So if we have nums here, and we're given 2, 7, 11, and 15, and then we have a target value that we're searching for of 9. So how do I as a person approach this problem? Well, most likely I would start at the beginning of the array, right? I'd start at position 0, and I'd look at number 2. And so I'm saying, okay, if I look at number 2, what's the difference between 2 and 9? Because if I can find the difference between 2 and 9, then I know the other number to look for in my array to find the two numbers that add up to our target. So if I have number 2 here, and I say 9 minus 2, well, 9 minus 2 is equal to 7. We know that 2 exists in our array, so that's number 1 that we're searching for, and now we have this 7 over here. Now, is 7 exist in our array? Well, so what we would do is we'd iterate one step at a time through our array, and we're searching now for 7, and 7 is the difference, right? 7 is the difference between our target value minus whatever n might be as we're iterating through array, and we're searching for that difference, right? This is the number that we're looking for, because if difference exists in our array, then boom, we've got the answer. We found the two numbers. So we know that we're looking for 7. So we iterate through array and we say, boom, we found 7. So now you have 2 and 7. And the answer now is just to return the indexes of 2 and 7. In this case, that would be 0 and 1, right? Because we start at position 0, or index 0 in arrays. So this is going to be the solution that we use when we implement it into code. Now, you might be asking, well, how do we track the values that we've looked at? How do we know if 7 is in our array? How do we know what numbers we've already seen, whatever we've already iterated through? Well, there's a really cool data structure in Python called a hash map. And so this is a data structure that you'll see a lot in coding interviews, so in coding interview questions. So it's something that you can always fall back on if you want to store values that you've seen, and it's going to be a really sort of like a recurring theme that we'll see a lot later down the line in the series. So it's a great place as problem number 1 to get a good understanding of what this data structure is. So let's say we have a hash map, and it's defined in Python like this. You would give it a name, probably not a hash map, but you give it a name, and you would define it using these two curly braces. And so the other function that we need to think about is we're looking for indices, right? We're looking for indexes. So the other thing we need to keep in mind is there's another function in Python called enumerate. And enumerate is what's going to keep track of not only the values in our array, but their positions. So if we have an array that's 1 and 2, or let's actually give it some better values that wouldn't be so confusing. So let's give it 12 and 99, right? So we have a two position array, 99, 12 and 99, right? So this would be index 0 and this would be index 1. So if we're using enumerate, we'll get 12 and 0, not just, 12, right? If we were to iterate normally through an array. So that's a really cool function, is using enumerate, because it's going to not only tell us the value of a position, but also the actual index that it's associated with. And again, enumerate is something you'll see a lot if you're utilizing Python in your data structures and algorithms problems. And so this is another super, super crucial function to think about and remember. It's just another tool that you can use in your arsenal alongside our hash map. So all of that being said, let's now code up our solution. So this solution is going to be an O of n time and space complexity. And the reason for that is our solution is going to require potentially iterating through the entire length of the array. That could be size of n, right? Whatever array size we're given, if it's, the array is 1,000 numbers long or one number long, that would just be n. That's how we sum that up and how we address that. So that's where the O of n time complex space complexity is going to come from. So with that being said, we'll jump into our coding solution here with just a couple of things kept in mind. Number one, we're going to keep track of a hash map, right? We're going to call that previous map. That's going to be our hash map. And then two, we need to utilize enumerate, because enumerate is going to tell us both the indexes and the value at that position. Three, we need to keep track of our difference, because our difference is going to tell us what value that we're looking for inside of our array to find at value number 2, right? And then finally, we'll just return the results of whatever we find. So all of that kept in mind, let's now jump over to Leetcode and we'll write the solution and see if it works. Leetcode here, and we're going to code up our solution. So again, what's the three things that we need to keep in mind? We need to keep in mind previous map, or hash map. We need to keep in mind the enumerate function. That's going to allow us to see the indexes and the value of each of the numbers in that array nums that we're given. And then the last thing we need to remember is difference. Difference, all of these three parts are going to be super key to tackling this problem. So we've broken down this problem into 3 steps, right? 3 different pieces. So that being said, we're going to first define our hash map. This is how you define a hash map in Python. And again, this is just going to be used to keep track of the values that we've seen. So next, we're going to utilize the enumerate function in Python. So again, enumerate is going to allow us to see the index and the number, and that's where you get this naming convention of I and n. It's pretty common to use I and n for index and number, but you can use whatever you want. If there's something that helps you remember it, or something that looks better or easier for you, as long as you and potentially your interviewer can understand what's going on, that's all that matters. So we'll call enumerate, and you can see that Leetcode has highlighted it in a different color to show that it's recognizing this enumerate function. And we're going to call that on nums. Why are we calling it on nums? Because nums is the name of the array that Python has given us. I'm sorry, that Leetcode has given us. And so then we need to find the difference. And what is the difference? Difference is the target value that we're given minus n, right? N being the number and I being the index. So we're going to define difference as diff equals target minus n. That's it. That's all we have to do, is we just have to say diff equals target minus n. And that's how we're going to find our difference. And then we're going to just say, is difference in our previous map? Does difference exist in our previous map? So as we showed in the written code explanation, what we're going to do is we're going to return I, and we're going to return the difference position, right? So difference, so in the case of our example 1 array that we see over here, if we're looking for target 9 and we're at position 0, 9 minus 2 equals 7. So what we'd be looking for is 7 in our hash map. Does 7 exist in our hash map? Right? So if it does, then we found our answer, right? If difference is in our previous map, then we know that the position of n plus diff is going to be our answer. Those are our two indexes that we're looking for. So we're just going to return it. So we say, boom, we found our answer. That's it. So we're going to call previous map on diff, and then also I, because remember, I is index, n is number, and I is index. So that's why we're calling I here. And then we're calling previous map on diff, because previous map is what's storing our difference. So that's why you can see here, right? So, and what happens if difference isn't in our previous map? Well, what we need to do is we need to update the values in previous map. So we're going to say previous map of n equals I. So what that's going to do is it's going to take the I and the n that we're currently looking at as we're iterating through nums, and it's going to assign that to our previous map, to our hash map. And so what it's going to say is, we're in our for loop here, right? So we're iterating through all of nums. We're looking at all of the numbers that are in that array nums that Python's given us. That Leetcode has given us. And regardless of how big this array nums is, regardless of what numbers are in there, we're going to iterate through it, and we're going to get to see all of the positions and all of the values. And the reason why, again, we're looking for positions is because that's what Leetcode is asking for. We're returning the indices. If they were looking for just the values, then of course we wouldn't have to utilize enumerate. That wouldn't bring us any benefit. We're only using enumerate because we want to find the indexes, not just the values. So going through everything again, this is how our code is functioning. This is it. This is the entire thing. This is the whole solution. We've defined our hash map. That was step number 1 for us. We've utilized enumerate to find the indexes and the values. That was our step number 2. And our final problem was finding the difference. And we did that here. We found our difference. It's target minus n, right? It's the 2, it's the 9 minus the 2, right? In our example 1, that's it. And then if it's in our map, if we found our difference, we want to return that position of difference and I. So we're going to output, in this case, 0, 1, because again, as we said, arrays start at position 0, and then we'll have position 1 over here, so 0 and 1, 7 plus 2 is 9. And if it's not, then we want to add the value to our hash map, and that's our whole solution. If we hit submit, you'll see here that our code should execute properly, and it does. And of course, the Leetcode run times are not always super even or reliable, but you can see here that this problem, whether or not it was easy or difficult for you, it helps you to understand some of the functions, some of the tools that you can add to your toolkit, both hash maps and enumerate, and these will make the next problems that you face a little bit easier, right? But even more so is the logic, because how we approach the problem in step 1, which is breaking it down into a few smaller steps, remembering to implement those steps into code, and approaching the problem as a person, forgetting about the code, forgetting about the program for a second, and just saying, how do I as a person solve this problem? And then breaking it into smaller problems, and then simply converting that into code. It's super easy to look up how to define a hash map in Python if you can't remember it. It's really hard to Google or Stack Overflow a whole algorithm, right, or a whole problem, and then trying to figure out how to implement a solution for it. So really, that's what our coding interview questions are asking, and that's what they're testing, is your logic, is your ability to take these problems and break them down into something that you can really easily understand. And then writing the code solution should be the easiest part, right? We just have to break down the problem into something that we can make sense of. So that's something that we're going to continue to refine and get better at as we go through this whole series. And as you'll find out, breaking down these problems, once you can do that, then writing the code solutions for it, that's just kind of tying it all together. So again, this is an O of n solution. You could do this in O of n log n. You could do this in O of n squared. But really what we're concerned about here is just the logic and the approach. So with that being said, we'll see you in the next problem.